B'siyata d'shmaya, this coming Shabbos, which is the Shabbos before Shabbos HaGadol, I'm going to have the privilege of delivering a Shabbos HaGadol derasha a week early because of the layout of Pesach this year at our shul here in London, Kal Yedidim. And I thought what a privilege it would be to take a couple of minutes to record the Shabbos HaGadol derasha, which will be available online on YouTube and on other platforms, for the week before Pesach, to enable this content to reach a much wider audience than those who are local and able to come in person. And so, with Hashem's help, I ask for the siyata d'shmaya necessary to be able to deliver this content, a deep dive into the sugya of Bittul and Bedikas Chometz in both Halacha and Avodas Hashem, to really understand what is the mechanism and the inner working of the mechanisms that are going to enable us to remove all chametz from our possession, all chametz from our outer homes, as well as our inner homes within our own selves. So we're going to be taking a look first at the halachic sugya, and then trying to unveil and reveal the depth that underlies every single aspect of the halachic structure, which of course we know is the aspect of the body of Torah, hein gufei halachas, to be able to tap into the neshama of it as well. B'siyata d'shmaya, Adonai sefasai tiftach, ufi yagid tihilasecha. It should all be b'shem Hashem nasa v'natzliach. The siyata d'shmaya, what a privilege this is to learn in this direct way with all of you, our virtual audience, of the Alecha Shiurim from all around the world. Thank you for joining and for learning with me and with us. So I have the sheets in front of me on the table. I'm going to post them onto a link, and that will be in the description. So it's very, very kedai, if you can, to try to download this PDF and to open it up on your phone or your PDF reader on your laptop or computer, so that we can follow along. It's going to be important to see the sources inside. So we begin with part one, which is the dual nature of Tashbitu. What is Tashbitu? What is this word? So first we have to take a step back. Obviously all of us know Pesach comes, we have to get rid of chametz from our homes. How do we know that we need to get rid of chametz from our homes? What's the biblical scriptural source? And so the truth is that there are actually 3 psukim that relate to the concept of making sure that we don't have any chametz on our homes, in our homes, on Pesach. And those 3 are as follows. The first 2 are much more similar in nature. They are lo sases. They are negative commandments telling us what we must not have and must not do. And those are 2 different psukim. One is lo yera'eh, that we should not see any chametz on Pesach. And the other is lo yimatzeh, that chametz must not be found in our possessions on Pesach. And the Gemara goes through why we need both. Each one has something to share that the other lacks, but ultimately these are 2 psukim, bal yera'eh we call it, and bal yimatzeh, these 2 lavin, that if a person has chametz on Pesach, they are over, they are transgressing these 2 negative commandments that are telling us quite plainly and clearly chametz is not to be had in our possessions on Pesach. The third pasuk is a positive commandment, which tells us that on the first day, it says, Ach b'yom harishon. There's discussion in the Gemara as to what that rishon is. It is the day before Pesach, Erev Pesach, and Ach tells us that it should be at midday, earlier on. Tashbitu sa'ar mibatechem. We must have removed all of our chametz from our possession. Tashbitu. We must get the chametz out of our possession on Pesach. There's discussion among the Mefarshim as to what the nature, we're going to learn a little bit about this, of Tashbitu is, whether, irrespective of what mechanism we utilize to get rid of the chametz, is it that there's a special mitzvah of Tashbitu, that it's like something that you have to do, Tashbitu, it's a mitzvah from the Torah that you have to get rid of chametz, or rather all the while that a person, irrespective of how early this is done, like it could be months before Pesach, but a person in one way or another makes sure that they get rid of all chametz, then they already fulfill this positive injunction of Tashbitu when Pesach comes in. This is discussed by the Minchas Chinuch, and in rabbinic, halachic, Gemara, Talmudic terminology, this is called Sheva al Taseh, whether Tashbitu is something which is just done passively, meaning as long as you don't have chametz in your home, you're good, and that's Tashbitu, and then you fulfill Tashbitu, or whether it is Bikum va'aseh, where the person has to stand up and actually take their chametz and destroy it. And there are a number of nafkaminas, there are a number of practical considerations that are going to emerge, whether one considers Tashbitu to be kum va'aseh or sheva al taseh. For example, if a person holds that getting rid of your chametz with Tashbitu is kum va'aseh, then a person needs to make sure that they actually have chametz on Erev Pesach and that they destroy it at that particular set time. And if a person doesn't have any chametz, they better get some so that they can fulfill the mitzvah of Tashbitu. That's one nafkamina. Another one is, imagine if somebody comes and burns your chametz for you, right? So did he steal away a mitzvah, or you still get the mitzvah of Tashbitu? Because no, as long as you don't have chametz, you fulfilled it passively, and that's called b'sheva al taseh. And there are a number of others. It's a mitzvah saseh dazman grama, that maybe this is obviously a more complicated conversation, because of course women are just as bound by this injunction not to have chametz in their homes. So that's not really, but we can consider whether it might be a mitzvah saseh shazman grama if it needs to be done at a particular time, or again it's just passive, and as long as you don't have chametz at that time, that's perfectly okay. Another nafkamina, does it need kavana? Right? Does a person because if a person is doing a mitzvah bekum va'aseh tashbisu, that you have chametz and you're getting rid of it at a particular time, does a person need to have kavana, or no? It's just as long as it just so happens to be that you don't have chametz, so then at least you're not in transgression of bal yira or bal yimat. So that's a fascinating conversation, not really our sugya, and that's the Minchas Chinuch on mitzvah tes in the Sefer Chinuch, where he goes into this in a very detailed and lengthy way. But ultimately, these are the three sources that we have that refer to getting rid of chametz on Pesach. Two lo saseis, bal yira and bal yimatzeh, as well as this quasi-aseh, whether it's active or passive, of actually getting rid of our chametz on Pesach. So, in order to make sure that we don't have chametz on Pesach, so what are you going to do? Let's say a person has it. How do you fulfill Tashbitu? How can we get rid of our chametz? So some of the options we'll be familiar with. For example, many people sell their chametz. Some people sell chametz gamor. Some people sell quasi-chametz kitnius, and so on and so forth. That's one way of getting rid of your chametz. It's not yours. And even though, yes, it's a technicality, ultimately after Pesach we'll buy back our chametz, all the while that we do not halachically own chametz on Pesach, that's one way of getting rid of it. Many others will be familiar with eating the chametz, obviously, right? If a person eats all the chametz or drinks all the chametz that they have, so then they don't have chametz on Pesach. But what we'll be most familiar with are two primary ways of getting rid of our chametz. One is called biur chametz, which is the minhag of all of Klal Yisrael, and beyond the minhag, well, it's a minhag according to some shitas, because they don't necessarily hold that you need to destroy the chametz by burning it, although we paskin at ein biur chametz ala sreifa, and that's what we do. So we'll be familiar with actual physical destruction. And like I just mentioned, there are a number of ways that there are opinions that hold that you can destroy chametz in any number of ways. But ultimately, Klal Yisrael holds that we burn our chametz on Pesach morning, not on Pesach morning, rather on Erev Pesach morning, before the time of a certain cutoff point when all chametz has to be destroyed at that point. I think I mentioned chatzos earlier, but really the zman is earlier than that, right? So just to be precise, but ultimately it's on the Yom Harishon, which is interpreted in the Gemara to mean the day before Pesach, but it's ach chelek, earlier on in the day. And at that time we burn the chametz. And in order to make sure that we have all of the chametz so we can burn it, we do something, again, we're all familiar with this, called the Bedikas Chometz, the night before, on Arla Ba Asar, which is the beginning of Meseches Pesachim, that opens up with the halachas of Bedikas Chometz, where a person goes around and they search using a candle to be able to look in the cracks and crevices, all places, as we're going to see, where a person thinks that there might be chametz. They collect all the chametz, and then the following morning, they burn it. That's the most apparent way of fulfilling Tashbitu, but ultimately we also know that another form is to be mevatel the chametz. This is a declaration that we recite twice, both after the Badika in the nighttime as well as during the biur chametz, or after the biur chametz of the daytime, where we recite kol chamir v'chamir de isli b'reshusei, and so on and so forth. It's a formulation in Aramaic, but you can say it in any language as long as you understand it. As we'll see, it's very important to know what we're saying, where we nullify all of the chametz. And we're going to learn about what the mechanism of that is. Like what does it mean to be mevatel the chametz? How does that work? That's going to be the second part of the presentation, be'ezras Hashem. Let's take a look at the first source, which is in Shulchan Aruch, Aruch Chaim, Taf Lamed Aleph 431 and Taf Lamed Daled 434. And the Shulchan Aruch says as follows. B'tchilas Leil Yudalad b'Nisan, in the beginning of the night of the 14th of Nisan, which is the night of Erev Pesach, so the night before Erev Pesach, we must search for all of our chametz by the light of a candle, and b'charin of izdakin, both in the cracks and crevices, and all the places where we assume and we suspect that we might have brought chametz during the year, with all of the parameters of what those places are, not our sugya now. Achar Badika, and in 434, in Taf Lamed Daled Siman Beis, Sif Beis, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Achar Badika miyad b'layla, in the nighttime, yivatlenu. In that time, we must be mevatel the chametz, v'yomer kol chamir di'isa b'reshused, lechazise, v'levi'arte, levatel v'leheve ka'af for da'ara, which is the lashon of the Yerushalmi, and Tosfos, as we're going to see, where a person nullifies, or rather not Tosfos, the other Rishonim, as we're going to see, a person nullifies the chametz. And they say that all chametz that's left in my possession, I am considering like dust. Whether I see it, whether I don't see it, if it's in my possession, like dust. And that's what it's considered to me. That's called Bittul chametz. And these are two forms of being able to get rid of the chametz in alignment with Tashbitu, at least according to most, but again we'll see, which is the injunction to make sure that I don't have chametz, so that I am not in transgression of Bal Yira'eh and Bal Yimatzeh, which is those two psukim, which are the losas, to tell me that I must not have chametz in my possession on Pesach. The Gemara tells us in Pesachim, Daf Vav Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Haboidek tzarich sheyivatel, which is exactly what we just learned from the Shulchan Aruch, that a person who does Bedikas Chometz also needs to do Bittul Chometz. Now why do you need both? If we presented these two ways as variant methods, just like eating all the chametz you have, just like selling the chametz to get rid of the chametz to make sure that we're not transgressing Bal Yirah or Bal Yimatzeh, so then why do I need both? He's saying that even if you do Badika, tzarich sheyivatel, you have to do Bittul. Amar Rava explains, maybe a person is going to find a beautiful cake, a beautiful roll, a challah roll, something amazing, this beautiful piece of chametz, and they're going to think about it. What does that mean? They're going to want it. What does that mean? Says Rashi, that even if a person did Badika, it could be that they didn't do a perfect job. And we're going to see in the Ran, that doesn't mean to say that their Badika wasn't valid. They did a valid Badika, meaning they did as much as they could. But ultimately, there was still something that was hidden, or a kikar b'shmei koira, something that was out of reach, but it maybe fell down on Yantiv, and you find it. V'daiti ilavei. What does that mean? Says Rashi. V'daiti aleha, or ilavei. Chashuva hi be'enav. It will be respectable in that person's eyes. V'chas aleha l'sarfa. And it's going to be difficult to him to think that now he's going to have to burn it, he's going to have to get rid of it. U'masha afilu rega echad. And just for one moment, there's a little bit of a thought in his mind, maybe I want to keep this, and immediately he's going to be over on Bal Yirah and Bal Yimatzeh. Immediately. Because he wants it. But once he is mevatel it, because once he nullifies it, which we're going to see in Shitas Rashi, is literally what Tashbitu means, according to the Targum Onkelos, it means livatel, to be mevatel it. So then, you don't have to worry, because you've gotten rid of your chametz. You were mevatel the chametz. Tashbitu. So you see, according to Rashi here, if a person does bittul, that is enough to enable the person to make sure that even if they should find chametz, doesn't matter, because it's ka'af or da'ara, and that's enabling them to make sure that they're not transgressing Bal Yirah or Bal Yimatzeh. You see here that there's a direct linear connection between bittul and Bal Yirah or Bal Yimatzeh. We turn to the beginning of Maseches Pesachim, which is Daf Beis Amud Aleph, and right there in the very first line of the very first Mishnah, the Mishnah tells us, Ar laba asar boitkin esachametz la'araner. In the evening of the 14th of Nisan, we are bodek, we check for all of our chametz la'araner with a candle. Rashi tells us, and again, Rashi doesn't have to comment on everything. If Rashi comments, he means to say something. So Rashi comments, boitkin, why do we check? Shelo yavar alav b'bal yirah b'bal yimatzeh. So that a person should not transgress bal yirah and bal yimatzeh. That means that Rashi is telling us that Bedikas Chometz is in and of itself, of course it's going to lead to Bir Chometz, is in and of itself a clear methodology and a technique and an approach and a strategy as to how to avoid Bal Yirah or Bal Yimatzeh. So Bedikas Chometz works. A few moments ago we just learned that Rashi told us Bittul works. So why do you need both? And beyond this, that both work, we're going to see that the Gemara tells us very clearly that midiyaraisa bittul ba'alma sagi, that according to the Torah, bittul is enough. And we learn here that you have to do bittul anyway, because a person who does bedika is going to need to do bittul anyway. And this is the question of Tosfos. Let's turn the page, or scroll down if you're following with the PDF. Says the Halachic Tosfos right there on the spot. Our Mishnah tells us that in the 14th of Nisan we are checking for the chametz perush hakuntris. Rashi tells us that bedikas chametz is enabling a person to make sure that they will not transgress bal yirah or bal yimatzeh. That's why we do bedikas chametz, because otherwise you might be in transgression. And this is what Rashi tells us. The kashalari. And Tosfos has a very difficult time with this. Kivan de tzarich bittul, we already need bittul. The Gemara tells us that vavam and beis, that a boidik tzarich shivatel, that a person who does bedika anyway needs to do bittul, as we're going to see. Umidi araisa, in another place the Gemara tells us that according to the Torah Akdasha, to fulfill our necessity to get rid of all of our chametz, to make sure that we aren't transgressing bal yirah or bal yimatzeh bittul ba'al masagi, the bittul is enough. Why do you need bedikas chametz at all? Why is it that we just learned later on in the Gemara tells us that a boidik tzarich shivatel, but where does it say that hamavatel tzarich bedika? Why do you need bedika? So he's taking it as a given that what Rashi says, that the reason we do bedikas chametz is to make sure that we're not going to transgress bal yirah bal yimatzeh. Like, that's not why, because we have bittul for that. So Tosfos says, so why do we have this necessity to do bedikas chametz, which the Mishnah tells us is a necessity? Is it dioraisa? It cannot be, because we're already making sure that according to the Torah, bittul ba'alma, we did bittul, you're going to have to do bittul anyway. And according to the Gemara, that's alone enough, according to the dioraisa. So it must be derabanan. So again, Rashi says that it's a dioraisa, because you're making sure that you're not going to transgress bal yirah or bal yimatzeh. It's a fulfillment of Tashbitu, you're making sure that you're going to get rid of your chametz, and that works. And Tosfos says that can't be. The dioraisa is already taken care of with bittul. And even if you do bedika, you're going to do bittul anyway. And that's enough. So then why, according to Tosfos, says, where did this rabbanan come from? Why is it that Chazal said that essentially hamavato, because you're going to have to do bittul, tzarich bedika? Why should you have to do bedikas chametz? Tosfos answers that even though it is true that midioraisa, the way to make sure that we're getting rid of our chametz so that we're not transgressing bal yirah or bal yimatzeh is bittul, and that's alone enough. He says it's a rabbinical injunction. The rabbis, the chachamim, Chazal, have told us that we need to check for chametz for a very simple reason. And to destroy it, shaloi yava la'echlai. Because if a person does bittul, and sure, in their mind, however bittul works, which we're going to see, but Ezra Hashem, they've gotten rid of all their chametz, it's possible that you might find some chametz. And then in that moment, a person could forget. And Tosfos says later on, it's more chamor than all of the different isurim, because we're ragil, the whole year we're eating chametz, and you can forget. And the minute that you put it into your mouth, this is a completely different transgression of achilas chametz on Pesach, which is incredibly severe. That case that we mentioned, if you have some kind of cake that's way up high and it's out of reach, and the Gemara goes back and forth, maybe we tell the person you need to do bedika up there as well, or maybe not, because it's too big of a tircha, it's too big of a bother, and it's way out of reach. And then the question is, well, maybe it's going to fall down, and if it falls down, we see that there's this fear that a person might come to eat it. And so that means that according to Tosfos, bittul is the dioraisa that enables a person to make sure they don't have chametz. That is the mahalach, that is the strategy to get rid of the chametz so that I'm not being over, chas v'shalom, a person isn't transgressing bal yiro or bal yimatzeh. And according to Rashi, it would seem that Bedikas Chometz is the strategy to make sure that we're getting rid of our chametz and not transgressing bal yiro or bal yimatzeh. But again, Rashi himself said that Bittul is necessary, like we said in the Gemara, haboidek tzarich sheyivatel, because according to Rashi, it's Bittul that's going to enable a person to overcome bal yiro or bal yimatzeh. So which one is it? Which one is a derabanan? Which one is a derasha? What's going on over here? The Meiri, in source number 5, brings the question of Tosfos, and he answers, and he brings Tosfos as answer. We'll go through it quickly. The Tosfos say that even though midiraisa it was enough that you nullified the chametz, you still need to do badika midirabanan, because maybe yimsa, maybe you'll find it, v'yishkach, and you'll forget, v'yaychal mimenu, and then you'll eat it. And that will be a terrible thing, which is a shaygig of kares, which is the repercussion and the consequence of eating chametz on Pesach. She'ena bittul moyel la'afkia es hakares min ha'ochla b'mezid. Shalonemar inin bittul elafkas bal yiro bal yimatzeh. That although bittul might work midiraisa to make sure that I'm not transgressing bal yiro bal yimatzeh, but let's not kid ourselves. If I say that pie of pizza that's sitting there on the table I think is ka'afra da'ara, and then I eat the pizza, it's not batul. I'm not eating dust. I'm eating chametz on Pesach. So bittul is not going to help for that. Bittul just makes sure that now I'm not transgressing bal yiro bal yimatzeh, because what I'm seeing is not chametz. That itself, by the way, is a big conversation. Without getting into this now, it's not part of our sugya, but there's two girsaos, there's two versions of a line in the Rambam, which causes some to consider whether maybe bittul doesn't work for chametz yadua. Maybe bittul doesn't work for chametz that I actually know is here. That even that bittul won't work for actual chametz. You're saying it's afar, but it's chametz. It's sitting there on your table. Maybe bittul only works for chametz she'eni yadua, and we're not going to get into that. That's a big topic and a big conversation. But ultimately, be that as it may, according to Tosfos, that it works on chametz yadua, that's only bebal yiro bal yimatzeh, meaning it's only enabling me to make sure that I'm not transgressing bal yiro bal yimatzeh. But certainly, if a person would come to eat it, forget about it. They ate chametz on Pesach. Right? And that's what the Meiri is saying. It only helps us overcome the possibility of transgressing bal yiro bal yimatzeh. But in mitzad, right? Because we're going to see already he's starting to hint to the technique as to, or we should say the mechanism as to how bittul works. But I'm not going to get into this now. According to the Meiri, which is the shita of Tosfos, without getting into this, that it has to do with being mafkirit, making it hefker, so it's not yours. It's not yours. But the minute that I eat it, it doesn't matter whose it is. You eat chametz on Pesach, you eat chametz on Pesach. It doesn't matter if a person eats chametz that belongs to someone else. It's chametz, and it's the same shavim l'chiyav achila. And then the Meiri throws in, which is going to be a nice bridge to source number 6, the Ran, where the Meiri says, and even though Tosfos are correct, that really all that you need is bittul and bittul ba'al masagi, and that's enough, and it's just a rabbinic injunction with regard to going around and collecting the chametz and getting rid of it because you might come to eat it, chas v'shalom. He says, even though that's true, ain't tzarich lidchos perish rishon, but he says there's still room to appreciate Rashi's approach that getting rid of the chametz in a physical, visceral way, like going around your house, collecting it, rounding it up, and burning it. He says, even though again, midiraisa it's true, bittul works, the Gemara tells us that, and also we need to cover all of our bases, like we learned from Rashi, that a person who does badika needs to do bittul anyway. Nachon, this is true. And bittul is just, like he says over here, he says it explicitly, it's just being mafkirit. It just means I'm relinquishing ownership. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It's chametz, it's not my chametz. Even though that's true, he says, let's be honest, even though, according to Tosfos, it's just a rabbanon, but the main getting rid of chametz is going around your house, rounding it up, and burning it. And this is why, one of the reasons why, for us, halachically, just like we read in the Shulchan Aruch in the beginning from Taf Lamed Aleph and Taf Lamed Daled, that first we do the Badika. The Badika is paramount, it's first and foremost, and then we do the Bittul. Because the visceral act of going around your home and rounding up the chametz and burning it is a lot more, at least in line with the spirit, as we're going to see, of getting rid of chametz as opposed to just relinquishing ownership. It's a very deep thing. It's a very deep, immersive spiritual experience of being able to search for the chametz, to find it and to burn it. And that's a very visceral experience that's necessary, as we're going to see, on many levels, both halachically as well as metaphorically and metaphysically and spiritually and emotionally, as we're going to see. That's the main thing. It's a very heavy thing. A person is rugil, like we said, a person has chametz their whole year, and a person needs to be very careful to get rid of all the chametz and to actually remove it from our home. Here we come to the Ran, and the Ran is a very famous one. It's a very lengthy Ran in the Dafei Harif, right there in the beginning. Dibra Maschel Boitkin. The Ran brings Rashi, and the Ran brings the question of Taisvis, and he says, he says, I see that this is a big confusion, and what is what? And we have Bal Yerobah Matzah and Tashbitu, and we have Bittul and Bedika, and which is Midiaraisa, which is Darabanan, many different Rashis, different Gemaras, different sources. What's going on over here? Says the Ran, let me explain the whole thing to you. Haresha Amar Torah, the Torah Kadosha said, like we said this pasuk in the beginning of this year, B'yom Rishon Tashbisu Sar Mibateichem. On the Yom Rishon, which again is Erev Pesach, we need to get rid of the chametz from our homes. V'Amar B'Gemara the Midiaraisa B'Bittul Ba'alma Saga. We learned that according to the Gemara, Bittul Ba'alma, just Bittul alone is more than enough, and that's it. According to Torah, you were mevatel the chametz. What that means, how that works, we're going to get into. That's good. That's good enough. So he says, maybe a person will think, Shema Timer Imkain Ein Lana Minatar Ela Bittul Zeh. So then Minatar Midiaraisa, all that you can do is Bittul, which is Shitas Taisvis, or at least the way that Taisvis presents it, that really all that you need is Bittul, and that's enough. And Bedika is just Midirabanan. Ve'ein lebediko bir chametz ikra minatar klal. He says, Ef Shalom Arkain. He says, no, Bedika is certainly Minatara, and he learns that the psukim that describe the necessity to do Bedikas Chometz with a candle, and there are many different verses, a string of verses, which for those of the Chaver are learning Lukutuman with us, it's almost associative in that way. This is Bechinas that, is Bechinas this. There are like 3 or 4 psukim that are brought to link searching to candles to searching one's heart, etc. And that's the Gemara over there. And he says, because the whole thing is based on psukim, we learned it out from psukim, Bedikas Chometz is also diaraisa. But he explains, Alakachu ikrin shel dvarim. He says, I want to explain it. Tashbisu could be done in one of 2 ways. So we learned already, and it's very explicit in the Gemara, that Bittul works to enable a person to fulfill Tashbisu and make sure that they're staying away from Bal Yiro or Bal Yimatzeh. Says the Ran, the Torah also makes an allowance for Bedikas Chometz to be a bona fide way of getting our chametz out of our house and destroyed away from our property on Pesach, to make sure we don't have chametz. Oy, so here he says the first of the 2 options. Number 1, he says either you have the strategy to go ahead and to be mavatal all the chametz that you have in your possession and in your mind, to get it out of your reshus, and that's alone enough. He says, even b'chametz yadu alai, which I mentioned in passing before, there are some that want to say that no, Bittul is only going to work for chametz she'eni yadua, for chametz that you don't know about, but over here we see, no, chametz yadu alai, clearly that it works. Oi, and this was Shitas Rashi, that Bedikas Chometz can also work and be effective midioraisa to get rid of your chametz. That if you didn't do Bittul, or before you did Bittul, Bedikas Chometz works midioraisa to search for it, and then to destroy it, to burn it. And like we said before, there's a bit of a conversation as to how you get rid of it. Does it have to be with burning? Does it have to be in other methods? But ultimately, this, according to the Ran, is midioraisa. That midioraisa Bedikas Chometz and Bir Chometz is going to work. And that's going to be the fulfillment of a biblical injunction of Tashbitu and enable the person to stay away from Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh. Ulefikach, therefore, kol she'ein mavatel, if a person chose not to do bittul, chayav livdoik, then minat Torah midiaraisa, a person needs to do bedikas chometz kedei shelo yaver lo b'bal yira or b'bal yimatzeh, in order to make sure that he isn't transgressing Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh. V'lefikach chasav Rashi zal sheboit k'nes chametz kedei shelo yaver lo b'bal yira Bal Yimatzeh. And that's why Rashi told us, yes, that Bedikas Chometz is going to enable a person to avoid Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh, even though, sure, Bittul is also an option, and that's what the Gemara had told us, Midyaraisa Bittul ba'al masagi. Nachon, this is true. But according to Rashi and according to the Ran here, that if you did not do Bittul, this is another valid methodology to enable a person to avoid Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh and having Chometz on Pesach. And that's how we can understand Rashi. And that's referring to a person who did not do bittul. But if a person does bittul, that's okay. That's another methodology. That's going to be enough. Just like a person sells their chametz, that's enough. This is enough. However, because the bittul is taloi, it's dependent. This is a new svara that we haven't heard yet. Because it's dependent on a person's consciousness and a person's thoughts and a person's feelings. And not every person feels in the same way. Not every person thinks in the same way. And it could be that yikalu is going to be a little bit lighter. And even though, sure, on some level he wants to be mavata the chametz, but there's a part of him that doesn't really want it completely. And he's not going to get it out of his heart completely. So for this reason, they said that hamavatel tzarich sheyivdaik. Right? It's not really the lashon, but that's essentially what they're telling us when they begin Mesachas Pesachim, that you need to do bedikas chametz. So why? So we already learned a svar from Tosfos who says that really the whole Bedikas Chometz is only Derabanan. Bittul is the way to go. The Bedika is necessary. Derabanan, because Shem Yavala Achlai. Over here we're learning another svara. Another reason to do Bedika, not just so that Chas v'Shalom, we shouldn't find Chametz and by mistake eat it, no. But Bittul is possible to be done incompletely or inauthentically. And therefore, we want to go ahead and to cover all of our bases and to make sure that the Bedika is done, Shelo Yaspik Bittul, so that maybe Bittul, Chachamim were machmer, the Bittul shouldn't be enough. It's Richu Bediko Bir Shu Maspik, Gam Kim and Torah, right? And that he brings the reason from Tosfos that, or they worried that if you have it, maybe you're going to eat it. Omashma, he continues, turn the page over, scroll down. From our Mishnah, it appears that Bedikas Chometz alone is enough. It doesn't say anything about Bittul. Because he doesn't make any mention of Bittul, because Midiaraisa, Bedika Ba'al Masage. That doing Bedikas Chometz and getting rid of your Chometz and burning it is enough. Midiaraisa. And if a person does find some chametz after that, it's okay. Burn it. And Shema Taimar, maybe a person will say, no, now that you found some chametz on Pesach after doing Bedikas Chometz properly, right? Maybe so now it emerges that really your Bedika wasn't a good Bedika. Chas v'Shalom. Lay say this isn't true. Sharei Samcha Torah Chazaka, the Torah is Seimech on a Chazaka. V'chol Badika is Samekay Misharagli Himatza B'am Chametz. If you did what you needed to do, done. You're finished. That means that even if a person didn't do a perfect job, so much so that they actually find chametz on Pesach, which is good to know, you find chametz on Pesach, it's okay. You don't need to go crazy. You check to the extent that you can, and zeo, and that's enough. And that means that even such a checking could leave open such a gap that you actually find chametz on Pesach. It's okay. You're not over lemafreya. It doesn't retroactively mean that you didn't clean good enough. You cleaned good enough. You don't need to worry about some loaf of bread that's hidden somewhere. Maybe it'll fall. You don't need to worry. That's why our Mishnah doesn't even talk about Bittul Chametz after Badika at all, even though we know the Gemara is going to tell us that Abodik Tzarich Shivatal, and even though Bittul Ba'al Masagi, it's not relevant. Our Mishnah means to tell us Badikas Chametz is a methodology to enable the person to avoid Bal Yiro, Bal Yimatzeh, and to fulfill the mitzvah of Tashbitu, whether it's Bekum Maseh or Sheval Taseh. That's why our Mishnah didn't mention Bittul at all. Then Rabbi Yehuda Marav came and he said, oh, by the way, if you do bedika midiraisa, you're good, but midirabanan, you need to be mevatel maskini megamar daina time Hashem yimsa gluska yafifa v'dati lavei. That maybe you're going to go ahead and you're going to find a gluska yafeh. And he says, listen carefully to the words of Rashi. Uperish Rashi is the shema shemitoich shedaiti lavei. In that moment, a person is going to pause and delay taking it out to be burned or to be mevatel it in that moment. Yashay Samalavara is going to withhold it from being burned. And then he's going to be over. That means from that moment he's going to be over Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh. But the implication is certainly it's not retroactively true. You did your Badika, you're good. That's it. You're not over on Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh, even though it emerges that actually you didn't check quite good enough because you actually did have. And it's literally Shema Yimatzeh, Lo Yimatzeh, but you did find it. It's okay. You did Badika, you're good. And if you do find it, what's the fear? Not that then you will have been in transgression about Yirah B'Yamatzah retroactively. No. But maybe in that moment, a person's going to pause. They're not going to want to burn it. And in that moment, they're going to be over on Bal Yirah B'Yamatzah. So he says, you are already yotze, your chiyuv of making sure that you get all the chametz out of your home. You were not in transgression about Yirah B'Yamatzah because bedika is good enough. Bedika midioraisa is good enough. So then you can think in this opinion, Tashbitu hainu oy Bittul, oy Bedika. Ubir, right? That the Torah is telling you there are two sanctioned methodologies of getting rid of your chametz that are both the fulfillment of Tashbitu. Number one, you can do Bittul midiraisa. Number two, you can do Badika midiraisa. And whether it's chametz yadua or we're worried that maybe there's chametz somewhere, but if you don't have any chametz at all, then the mitzvah is not relevant. So he says, or let's just read it to the end. If you don't have any chametz, so then you're good. In order to make sure that either, and we're covering our bases, that either if I chose, well, let's leave all that out for now, that maybe I will have chametz, or if I do know that I have chametz, you have one of two options. Number one, you can do Badika and Bitul, but you still need to do Bittul. Why? Because you might think that I did Bittul, so I don't need to do Badika, or I did Badika, I don't need to do Bittul. Either one of them is going to require you to do the other. Both work midiraisa, but both require me to do the other midirabanan for various reasons, each one in its own way. So let's read it together. It's in the box here just to make it clear. According to the Ran, either Bittul or Biur Chametz work midiraisa, even on known Chametz, and Chametz Yadua. The fulfillment of Tashbitu and avoidance thereby of Bal Yirah or Bal Yamatzeh. However, in each case, Chazal mandated that we do the other for protection. What's the unique protection? That if you did Bittul and you chose that this is going to be your methodology of getting rid of the chametz, to do Bittul, and Bittul works midiraisa, we know that from the Gemara, midiraisa Bittul ba'al masagi, and avodik tzarich shivatel. So Bittul works, but we still need to do Badika, because maybe one's Bittul wasn't completely sincere, or because one might come across the chametz and come to eat it. And if a person chose to do Badika and Biur, which midiraisa works, one must still do Bittul, which then becomes midirabanan, haboidik tzarich shivato, because one might stumble upon some chametz, and like we learned from Rashi, desire to keep it. Not that retroactively that would disregard and nullify their Badika, because it means they didn't check good enough, and now they're over on Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh. No, that was good. However, you might desire to keep it in that moment, and then be over on Bal Yirah and Bal Yamatzeh. And that's the Mishnah Berurah brings both. The Mishnah Berurah brings this. If you take a look at source number 7, V'gam zarach levatel az chametz, you need to do Badika and Bitul. Taf lamed daled, which we already learned, Sif Beis. Min Torah be'ech me'am sagi, really midiraisa, both of them work. Dik hishmavat lena beliboy umafkirai, over here also. Not going to get into it now because it's the second part of the shir. When you're mevatel it from your heart and you are mafkir it and you declare it ownerless, shuv ena shalai, it doesn't belong to you anymore. Ve'ena over love. And here he uses the words vikol shekain, which is a hint of the meiri, that even more so because it's so much more visceral. When you search for it and you get rid of it, right? So that's also certainly going to be enough midiyaraisa to make sure that you fulfill tashbitu and you are no longer going to be over bal yira or bal yamatzeh. It's not enough. You got to do both. Got to do both. Because they worried that like again, it's just we're reiterating what we learned, that because Bittul relies on a person's mind and a person's heart and a person's feelings, and he sees chametz that's super expensive, he doesn't really mean that he's getting rid of it. The Asha Befiv Yoimar, and even though he's being mavatal with his mouth, she batal vehefker v'chashiv ka'afra, that it's batal and it's gone and it's completely erased. Maybe he wasn't completely sincere. And he's not going to be nullifying it completely in his heart. And then really the bittul wasn't a really good bittul, it wasn't complete. Because he didn't get it out of his house, and maybe if he's going to have it in his house and we're ruggle and eating chametz the whole year, because we didn't so we're worried that he's going to come to eat it. Even if he did it, loisagi, he's riffing off of the Gemara that says midiraisa bebitul ba'amasagi, but really loisagi, it's not going to be enough. You got to do bedika too. You got to do that. However, if you did bedika, which according to the Ran and Rashi, midiraisa is enough to take care of tashbitu and take care of bal yira bal yamatzeh, still tzarich levatel. This is the other side, that if you choose to do bedika midiraisa, you're still going to have to do Bittul. Gam kein shemala yivdak yafe. Maybe a person didn't check properly the imsa chametz of Pesach, the yavar love, and you're going to find chametz on Pesach, and in that moment, if a person desires it, you're going to be over. What does this all mean? Bipnimius. So bipnimius, everybody knows we're trying to get rid of chametz from our home, and it's so important because chametz represents the Yetzer Hara. Chametz is ego. Chametz is puffed up. Chametz isn't authentic. It isn't the thing itself. It's something that grows and grows, and before you know it, it becomes something completely different, and it presents itself as something other than what it actually is, which is just matzah. And we have to get rid of that. And we're going to learn in a minute. We're going to learn the mamak and the depth of the mechanics of Bittul, how that works. What Bittul is, we're going to see in a moment. Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, what that is. What does it mean, Bittul? But Bittul, in this context, means that we're going to get rid of chametz by negating our ego entirely. All of our negative traits, we're going to get rid of wholesale by just being mevatel. And we're going to learn what Bittul is. Different approaches to that experience of Bittul. But Badika means that I take a look at each and every midah in and of itself, and I work on it actively to destroy it. It's not this holistic, sort of whole person, ego-oriented nullification and humbling, but it's taking a look at this midah and working on it to the point that I can destroy that negative midah in and of itself. And what we're saying is that whatever approach you take, and we're about to learn about Bittul in great depth, you got to do the other one also. Because if a person, let's go through it in a spiritual sense, if a person chose to do Bittul, but maybe that Bittul is not with a whole heart, and therefore maybe it's incomplete. It's not really real. Or we're worried that even if a person did do Bittul, if you still keep the chametz around, before a person knows it, they can quickly come back into ego and they transgress, whatever way this is. And so you have to do both Bittul and Badika. And the flip of that, if a person chooses to do Badika, you have to do Bittul. Because it's possible still that you might still encounter some negative midah, and because the ego is still there, you might want to keep it. You might want to keep hold of it and And if a person still has that sense of self, which is active, and we're not working on that part of it, then it could be that you might stumble across a bad midah, or you might stumble across some kind of circumstance which is making itself amenable to sin, whether a person is going to certain places or doing certain things, hanging around certain people, and so on. If a person hasn't taken care of the bittul, it could be that that's going to get in the way. And so this is the deeper meaning of what Badika is, of what bittul is, and according to the Ran, you need both. Let's quickly take a look at Avodas Yisrael, the Kazhnitzer Magid, who goes through a number of the halachos with regard to Bedikas Chometz, and he learns them al pi pnimius. Let's go through this quickly, and then we'll begin the second part of the shir b'siyata d'shmaya. It's a minhag to put out, according to the Arizal, to put out 10 little bread clusters together in silver foil or wrapped up in some paper or something, and to put them around the house. We know that if you didn't put them out, that's okay. It means that the person's mind while making the bracha isn't that they will find, but that if they find, they're doing the bedika, and that's enough. And he says, so what does it actually mean in a deeper level? Because ultimately, as all the Svarim HaKadoshim talk about, the Yetzer Hara is chametz. Chametz is the Yetzer Hara, as we just mentioned. And therefore the minig is we are putting out chametz to say, I'm not kidding myself. There's what to look for. And maybe even if I think that I don't, here it is. It's on the table. Everyone has something to work on. Everyone has something to look for. Let's not kid ourselves. There's nobody who doesn't have any chametz. The person who thinks that they already fixed everything, the one thing you can know about that person, they have no clue what serving God means. Because serving God is infinite. God is infinite. His service is infinite. Here we come to the second halacha, that you need to search where you brought the chametz. Says the Avodas Yisrael, it's a classic. Or it's a loimer. What this means is a person needs to find chametz where they brought it. Every single person in and of themselves. If a person is not guarding their personal moral purity properly, or looking in places you shouldn't look, a person needs to seek out those places where we bring chametz during the year. Everybody has something that they struggle with. A person who's struggling with a certain thing, a person needs to go ahead and to seek that out and to find it and to say, I'm going to work on, I don't want this chametz in my life this year. B'tshuva v'charata gemura, and that's the process of bittul, and that's, or in this context, that's the process of the bedika and the beer of chametz. Sha'al yasa'ir avera, that a person is doing tshuva erev Pesach. A person says, I'm looking not just around my house, I'm looking inside myself. I don't want this anymore. Va'al masha asa yachsa b'tshuva shlema, and we'll do tshuva b'vadiyim chalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and certainly HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be moichel us. In every context, it doesn't matter if shmir sabris, shmir seinai. But a person needs to take that on themselves. And here's the really classic bit of it, which is so gewaldic and beautiful. But the Mishnah tells us that any place that you don't usually bring chametz, you don't need a check. So he says, Nira Haremes, he says what this means is, there are some people, they don't look at their own actions. They're always looking at what someone else is doing wrong. And they're always looking to rectify someone else's chametz. Right? So the Tana tells us, whoa, if you didn't bring the chametz there, then it's not yours to fix. It's not yours to check. It's not yours to burn and get rid of. Don't all the time be looking at what other people are doing and finding their chametz. Any place that you didn't bring the chametz, ein sarich bedika. To focus on his own maisim. And finally, chayrin hagavayin she'ein yad adam agas sham v'chayrim amuchim pachas migimel tvachim Einam tzrichim Badika, certain places that a hand of a person can't reach, or it's deeper than Gimel Tfachim, and so on. You don't need to check in those places. What does this mean? Nera haremesh al yemer adamech yuchal livdei kalachatoim avonei ani zoicher as kulam. He says a person thinks there are so many averas, so many different things. I can't even remember all of them. How am I going to do tshuva on them? Lazaimer, he says it's not necessary. Chayir magavoyim she'ein yad adam agasham. If your hand doesn't reach there, it's lazaimer she'ein zoicher isam. There are things that you don't remember. There are things that have fallen by the wayside. There are certain issues and certain things that are beyond your reach. Ein tzarich bedika, those you don't need to be baidek. Ala adam tzarich shel levatel v'lasha b'tshuva al oisan avayne shuhu zoicher. What you do remember, and more deeply, what is within what Rabbi Dessler would call your nekudas habachira, that you got to work on. That's yours, and that you'll take care of. Be'ezras Hashem. So now, according to the Ran, we said, going back into the halachic aspect of it, there is both Bittul, which works midiyaraisa, but you got to do Badika, and there is Badika that works midiyaraisa, but you have to do Bittul midirabanan of each, right? So whatever you're choosing to do, the other one will become the derabanan that you then need to do as well for the reasons that we mentioned earlier. What is this thing called Bittul? Badika is very intuitive. You go around your house, you find everything that you need to find, and you burn it. That's very clear how that is a fulfillment of Tashbitu, and you're not being over on Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzah because you got rid of all your chametz. That's fine. How does Bittul work? What is the mechanism of Bittul? We take a look at the Rambam Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah Parak Beis Ois Beis Halacha Beis, and says the tzaddik, Umay hashbasa zu amura b'Torah. What is this hashbasa? He sheyivatal hachametz b'liboy. The person nullifies the chametz in their heart. V'yachshav esayka afar, and he considers it now to henceforth be dust. V'yasim b'liboy she'en b'reshusay chametz klal. And then he says, I don't have any chametz at all. And if I do have chametz, it is dust, it's something that I don't want, it's something that I don't need, and that's that. I get rid of it. Rashi, it shouldn't say Rashi and Taisus, it should say, one second. It should just say Rashi, Pesachim Dalet Amid Beis, that bebitol ba'al madich ziv tashbisu v'loik ziv tavaru. Says Rashi, what is bitol ba'al masagi? Where do we know bitol from? Says Rashi, this word tashbisu, just like the Rambam, that tashbisu is bitol. Bitol is tashbisu, which is a separate din by Pesach, that you got to get rid of the chametz from your home, and it doesn't say you should burn it, it says tashbisu, and the Targum Onkelos, like I mentioned earlier, says tivatlun, and there's a Sifri as well, and a Yerushalmi that also makes reference to this, that we need to be mevatalid, that's what tashbisu means, to be mevatalid. What is, so okay, fine, but what is bittul? He says, da hashbasa de leiv hu hashbasa. Getting rid of it in the same thing in your heart. Saying, like the Rambam says, this is afar. This is now dust. This is earth. This is not chametz. This is dust. And we say, well, how far does that go? Does it work even for chametz yadua? According to the Ran, yes. According to Rabbi Shainim, yes. Does it work even if I eat it? Okay, not so much, right? Because the second that you eat it, you're eating chametz. So let's not pretend. But for the purposes of Bal Yirah or Bal Yamatzah, it absolutely works. And the Ritva says that yesh, this is on Pesachim, that the reason that a person does not transgress Bal Yirah or Bal Yamatzah after they did Bittul is mishum desulek aleh uteres lechem. He says it's not bread anymore. Like you totally nullified it. It is no longer bread. It doesn't exist. Tosfos takes a completely different approach. Tosfos has two questions on Rashi. We're not going to get into that now, but that it cannot be the mitzvah of Tashbisu. And this also relates, according to the Minchas Chinuch, to the discussion as to whether Tashbisu is b'sheva al tasin kum v'aseh, not our sugya. So therefore Tosfos says, you know what bittul is? It's not Tashbisu. It's not some separate special halacha by Pesach that you got to do Tashbisu and there's this new construct of bittul, turning it into dust, however that works. No. He says, mitam, the reason that bittul works is the me'achasha bitlo have hefker. He says it's just another mechanism for getting rid of the chametz. That the same way that a person can sell all their chametz, and therefore it's chametz, but it isn't theirs, and so they're not going to be over. You can go to the store and look at chametz, not yours. So the same thing applies for bittul. It works because of hefker. This concept of hefker that is applying in kol haTorah kula, person can be mafkir something, they can get rid of it. It's hefker. V'yatzim rishusai, and then you are getting it out of your possession, umuter, and then it's permitted. You're allowed to look at someone else's chametz. It's not yours because you relinquished ownership of it. Relinquished ownership. Okay, the Ramban has a completely different approach. So far we have two approaches, which is approach number one is this Tashbitu-oriented new construct that getting rid of chametz has to do with thinking that it's dust. It's no longer, according to the Torah, it's not Taras Lechem, it's something else. Taisa says hefker. It's just the same hefker like all over the Torah. It's hefker. Now the Ramban over here on Pesachim, same Amid, Daf Daled Amid Beis, asks 7 questions on Taisvus. 7 questions he asks. Not going to get into all of them now. He asks that the Gemara is perfectly capable of using precise wording. If the Gemara meant to say hefker, it could have said hefker. Why is it calling it bittul? What's this idea of bittul? And also in the lashon that's brought in the kadmonim of and in Chazal of how to do this bittul. It doesn't say hefker in it. The same thing doesn't have that lashon. And he brings 7 questions on Tosfos. And because of these questions, he says, I'm going to come up with a brand new construct. He says, I say the following. He says, the reason that Bittul works to enable ourselves to get out of this experience of having chametz on Pesach, and thinking that it's dust, which is something that's not fit to be eaten. He says, the reason this works is Mediv Rabbi Shmuel, because there's an opinion in the Gemara of Rabbi Shmuel, that Rabbi Shmuel says, who the Amar, he says that there are 2 things that are not in the possession of a human being. They are not owned by this person, but the Torah will consider this person to own it for certain reasons. For example, if a person digs a pit in Rosh Hashanah, he doesn't own that land. He doesn't own the pit. He dug it in someone else's land. It's not his. But the Torah will consider it to be yours from the standpoint of responsibility and culpability. Someone's got to be culpable. If somebody's going by and trips into the pit, the person who dug it's going to be doing the damages, even though it is not really his. But the Torah considers it to be yours. The Torah put it back in your reshus to enable you to be culpable, or the person who dug the pit, to be culpable to pay the damages if somebody was walking by and fell in. The other one, says Rabbi Shmuel, is chametz on Pesach. Why is it not really yours? What do you mean? You own it, bought it from the store with your money and so on. It's yours, it's on your shelf, it's your chametz. See, he says because there's an opinion that says that chametz is completely asur b'hana. Chametz is forbidden to have benefit from it at all. There's another opinion as well, but according to that opinion, chametz is asur b'hana. So for all intents and purposes, if it's something that you cannot benefit from in any way, you don't really own. If you can't benefit from it, if it's not under your autonomy, then you don't own it. And with what do you own it halachically? It's not yours. And so from that standpoint, chametz is not really yours on Pesach. How then could a person go ahead and be over on Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh, owning and having chametz in their possession? It's not mine. It's asur b'hana. It's somebody else's. All of my ownership fell away. So what does this mean? That I'm now over, I'm transgressing? Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh isn't mine. Says Rabbi Shmuel, true, but the Torah puts it back in your reshus that if you should want it, and here's the key point, if you should choose to accept ownership, then it's Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh, even though it's still forbidden in Ana. But in order to enable a person to transgress Bal Yira or Bal Yimatzeh, if a person should protest to the Torah's putting it back in their reshus, shouldn't protest, and a person says, yeah, I do want this, I do take ownership of it, so then that's what enables them to be over on Bal Yira and Bal Yimatzeh. Right? So going back into the Ramban, it's not yours. It's not your property. So start again from the beginning of the line. The Torah was makbid that it's not supposed to be in your reshus, and a surya hana is not considered yours. And it's not called yours. So then theoretically, maybe a person shouldn't be over on Bal Yira Bal Yimatzeh with this chametz because it isn't his. But the Torah put it back in your reshus for the purpose of culpability in these two labim, because if he wants it and he accepts it, then that's called bal yirah bal yamatzeh. Even though it's still asar bana, not really your mama, not really lecha, Rabbi Shmuel says the Torah put it back in your possession. Says the Ramban, this is how Bittul works. Lefikach, therefore, zeshi hiskima daita ladas Torah. This person who accepts what the Torah is telling you, and he says, okay, the Torah took it out of my reshus, and the only way that the Torah is putting it back in my reshus is if I want it, but it's not mine b'chlal. And he affirms this, that the Torah made it asr ba'ana, and he doesn't want it. And he says it's afar, it's nothing, it's not part of my property because the Torah took it out of their reshus. Then that affirms this nature of the ownerlessness. It's not his. It was taken out of his reshus. It is asr, so it's asr bana. And theoretically, well, it could have been put back into your possession if you wanted it, but I don't want it. That's Bittul. So Bittul works mitam for the reason of this Rabbi Yishmael, and it isn't Rashi's Bittul of Tashbitu per se, and it isn't Taisvis, which is Hefker, certainly not, that's what he's attacking. It's this Chiddush of the Ramban, that it works as a result of this, that you're blocking the Torah putting it into your ownership, because it isn't in your ownership, and it's not going to be in your ownership. But if a person is not doing Bittul, then the Torah would consider it to be in your ownership, and if you want it, you keep it. And then a person's Bittul means, I'm affirming this, that the Torah took it out of my reshus. Now the Ran says something very interesting. Let's take a look at the Ran. Back in that Ran, it's just a different piece. What is this Bittul? We can prove from the Gemara. He proves, so he says that Bittul is because of Hefker, which sounds a lot like Tosfos, but look what he does. Because he has to explain why this Hefker is going to be different than usual Hefker, where a person would usually need to make a declaration in front of other people. What do you mean a person is doing Bittul, and Bittul believe, the Gemara says, a Bittul in a person's heart without even expressing it with their mouths? Like, how does that work? Which is, by the way, one of the questions of the Ramban. So the Ran also has this question, and he says that, well, it's still Hefker, but the reason this Hefker works in the way that it does, which is completely different than regular Hefker, for a number of reasons, is because this Rabbi Yishmael, which changes the whole dynamic in terms of my relationship with this particular property that we call Chometz on Pesach. It's true that something that is with that it's within a person's reshus, that you couldn't be mafkirid in this way, where a person just thinks to himself or says this formulation. B'chametz shiny. Chametz is different. Utilizing this very same svar of the Ramban, so he's using the word hefker, but what we're going to see in a minute from the Divrei Yirmiyahu, there's an Achron commentary on the Rambam, that he's basically saying it's semantics. He's basically saying the svar of the Ramban, that because it's not in your reshus, just by revealing this intention that I don't want it, that he doesn't want any zuchus in this, he doesn't want it, that alone is enough. And I wrote in the footnotes, take a look at Shulchan Aruch Arav, take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan, where they try to put these two things together in a much more explicit way, weaving these two concepts together. So take a look over there. And ultimately, the Divrei Yirmiyahu here, commenting on Rambam, that Rambam Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah Beis, Halacha Beis, says, V'ayin b'gemoshitas Ramban, look at what the Ramban says, Sheirich the Bittul in a Hefker, where he says, no, it's not Hefker, and he says, Ukasav Kamay Kain Kaharan. He says the Ran says something very similar. Again, even though the Ran uses the word hefker, but ultimately is using the same mechanism as the Ramban. Kivin shat Torah asli kishalai, the Torah made it yours. After Yisra no ena shalai v'chai bebeis lam imnei shadaita Allah, because you wanted it to be kiyuma. Avol bebitlai, if a person is mevatel shuv ena nikra shalai, it is no longer yours because the Torah took it out of your rishus and you affirmed that you didn't want it. The loikarin beilacha, it isn't yours v'ena to be kiyuma, you didn't want it at all. Take a look at the chart over here. And the chart shows us Rashi and the Rambam, who are of the opinion that Bittul is Tashbitu, like the Ritva says, it is no longer bread. It's not mitaras lechem. Tosfos holds that Bittul is not Tashbitu. No, Tashbitu is Tevaru. Tashbitu is you find it, you burn it. That's called Tashbitu. But rather, it's Hefker. It's being mafkirid. And the Ran and the Ramban, we're putting in the same camp here, is that Bittul is the refusal to reassume ownership. That's this svara, the mechanism, the lumdus of how this works. Where the Ran and the Ramban say that Bittul is because really the Torah took it out of my rishus. It theoretically could put it back in my rishus to enable me to be over by Rabbi Matzeh. And I say, no, I don't want it back in my rishus. I affirm this, that it's asr ba'anaf for a reason. Torah doesn't want me to have it. It's out of my rishus. What are the nafkaminas? Two very basic nafkaminas. That if you hold that Bittul is mitam hefker, so then you need dibur. You need to say it. It needs to be something that you say. It's a declaration. If you hold that it's just in the heart, whether the Ran and the Rambam or Rashi, or rather the Ran and the Ramban or Rashi and the Rambam, so then it's just bittul b'leiv. It's just something that you think to yourself. And in the actual nusach of if you do speak it out, so then the question is, do you need the word hefker there? Do you need to declare that you're making this thing hefker? What's the pnimius of all of this? Going back to what we had started earlier, speaking about getting rid of chometz b'pnimius, what that means. To get rid of the Yitzhahara, so we spoke about the Bedikas Chometz, of looking and searching for this issue, that issue, clearing my house, clearing my life of the capacity to connect to things that are going to bring me into terrible, negative places, Shmir Seinayim, Shmir Sabris, and so on, to be boidik and to get rid of it. What's the depth of Bittul, which we said earlier is the aspect of ego nullification. So take a look at the Heilige Shlach Kodesh. This is in Parshas Ba'aloischa, where Moshe and Aaron Amar V'nachnu Ma. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron respond to those that are challenging them by saying, "What are you arguing with us for? V'nachnu Ma kisalinu aleinu. We are ma. We are nothing. What are you saying? What are you challenging us for? V'nachnu ma. We don't exist." Avram Avinu also expressed humility by saying, "Va'anoichi afar ve'efer. I am dust and ashes." David HaMelech alav Shalom, and David HaMelech expressed his humility by saying, "Va'anoichi telas v'lo ish." I'm a worm. I'm not a human. I'm a worm. Says the Shlo, Moshe anav mikulam. Moshe's anivus is the most precise, the highest level. Ki Avram him shalatzma la'afar be'efer. Avram said he's afar be'efer. V'David l'telas. Aval Moshe amar en anachnu klum. This is an even deeper level, an even deeper madrega. V'zeu inyan. Or that rather, v'zeu anav mikal adam. This means that Moshe Rabbeinu was an anav mikal adam. Says the Shlach Kodesh. That word adam is the Rosh Tevis. These three humble individuals. Adam is Rosh Tevis. Avraham, David, and Moshe. Moshe's humility transcended all of them. The ish Moshe anav ma'od mikal adam. Of all of the three, Avram, David, and Moshe Rabbeinu is an anav ma'od mikal adam, because his expression of humility is the deepest. And Kadosh Baruch Hu put it into my heart, into my mind, mamash matana, a gift, midbar matana, as we're going to see, a real gift, that maybe it's possible that we could say that the lumdus of understanding Bittul, of which we have three shitas, Rashi and the Rambam, Ran and the Ramban, and then Tosfos, align beautifully with these three approaches to humbling ourselves and being mevatel our chametz of ego. These three. Let's work through them one by one. What did Avram say? And take a look at the chart that we have over here. Avram said, "Anochi afar ve'efer." What does that mean? I am dust and ashes. Avram is called Avinu, right? He's called our Father. And the Medrash Rabbah tells us, which I bring over here in the box, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak says, based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, Abraham lo nitzel mikivshan ha'esh ela b'zchus shel Yaakov. The only reason that Avraham Avinu lived, the only reason that Avraham Avinu existed in the world, is because he was going to father Yitzchak, who was going to father Yaakov Avinu, and bring the whole world into existence. Avram exists, but his whole existence is contingent upon Avinu, this that he is a father. I want to say that this level of humility is complete self-erasure. I mean, I do not just disown the ego, I see it as a non-reality. Anoichi, I once had an Anoichi, but really, once the children come into the world, it's apparent that the only reason that I'm alive is for them. That's the Bechina of Avinu. Anoichi, but Afra ve'efer. And this is Rashi and the Rambam. To be mevatel the chametz, that it should be like Afra ve'ara. Anoichi, Afra ve'efer. Completely doesn't exist. So there is chametz, there is the ego, there is the self, but now it's completely nullified. It's a non-reality. David says, "Anoichi toilas v'lo ish." I'm a worm, a v'lo ish. I'm not a person. And we know that David is called, of course, Malkeinu. What's the concept of a melech? We learn from the Malbim, others. If a king is going to go ahead and to impact his country negatively, he can't kill everyone. Because kingship is a contingent concept. Ein melech b'loy am. A king is only a king when he has a nation. Doesn't have a nation, he's not a king. Malchus, say in Pneumius terminology, the less lamagarme klum. Malchus has nothing of its own. David HaMelech, by the way, was supposed to be born a nefel, Chazal tell us. He was supposed to be born, he was stillborn. And then we know, right, that Adam Rishon gave 70 years of his life. David HaMelech, anoichi toilas, v'loy ish, which is the ma'amakim, the depths of the lumdus of the Ran and the Ramban, to say the chametz is not mine at all. The chametz was never really mine. It isn't that, okay, I had chametz and I nullified it. It's that chametz aser ba'ana, the Torah took it out of my reshus, it's not mine. And this whole call is not really humility, this is self-denial. Right? This is what we call existential vulnerability, is I never existed in the first place. There's no sense of self whatsoever. So by Avraham Avinu, there's a sense of self and then it's nullified. By David, which is the Bechina of Melech, there is the aspect of this was never mine to begin with. There's no self. It's just I'm a spark of the divine. There's no self at all. Not that there isn't now, there never was. Anoichi toilas, v'lo ish. But then finally we come to Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'nachnu ma." And unlike Avraham Avinu, who does his thing with fighting for Sodom, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not so fast, and he turns back, and Avram goes back, Moshe Rabbeinu stands up for Klal Yisrael. And it doesn't say that Moshe Rabbeinu was so humble that he didn't exist. It says, Shechina medaberes misach groinai shel Moshe, the Medrash tells us. The Shechina spoke using Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth. Moshe Rabbeinu had a sense of self, and he chose actively to relinquish that sense of self, not to mean that he didn't utilize it, but he gave it over into the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu is transparency, self-withdrawal, which means the ego remains, there's still a sense of self, but I surrender it into the service of Hashem, and I want to say that this is Tosfos. There is chametz, and it is mine. Right now, I'm not destroying it, I'm relinquishing ownership. I'm giving the ownership up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm recognizing that I have talents, and I have abilities, and I have a sense of self, and I'm going to utilize that sense of self to enable HaKadosh Baruch Hu to speak through me. And that's the ultimate anivos, that onav mi'od mi kol adam. V'anachnu ma is also gematria Adam. This is what makes him an Adam. He is an Adam. But he's an Adam that's channeling the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And ultimately the Mishnah Berurah makes it clear, number 9, that really at the end of the day, he says Bittul, with all the different shitas, is through Hefker. Bittul, we say ultimately, is Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the ultimate of anivos. A person should say, they should put in the word hefker, which was what our nusach is. And then will work for everyone. Even though you said it by yourself, you didn't say it outright, that's okay. Because it's not like regular hefker, as the Ran pointed out. Ultimately, this is the ikr, is to put the word hefker in there, and he says later on, Bittul hefker. He just says flat out, Ibaskins, the bittul works through the mechanism of hefker. But if he doesn't know what he's saying, if he doesn't know what he's saying, mamahani bittul, so how are you going to be mafker it if you don't know what you're saying? This is ultimately the ultimate form of anivos. Not the Avram Avinu anivos, and certainly not the David HaMelech anivos, but the Moshe Rabbeinu anivos. Rabbi Nachman says this very clearly, but this will come to a close. Heilige Rebbe writes on the Kutumran, Tinyana, Terchav Beis. Ach be'inin achna, toyim oilam harbe. People make big mistakes with the inyan of achna. Our whole avodas Hashem is to try to get to a state of confidence, to try to get to a state of self, but in a holy way, to live with an expanded consciousness. When we say achna, we don't mean that a person should walk around and say, "Oh, I'm nothing, I'm good for nothing, I can't do anything, I'm worthless." Chas v'shalom. That's not what achna means. Then a person is literally living in moichin de katnos, and they're going to be withheld from manifesting all of the beautiful gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to them to manifest. And there has to be a wisdom to it. That's why it's so difficult to really be an anav, because to be an anav doesn't simply mean you shut down all the fuses of your system and you simply say, I'm a good for nothing. No, that would be easy. Anybody could do that. But to be an anav means Rak Moshe Rabbeinu, Olav Shalom. Hu haya anav mikol ha'adam, the Avram, the David, but Moshe Asher al Panei Adama, because he lived on the earth. He lived al Panei Adama. He had a garain, he had a throat. Shechina medaberes v'said Groi Shal Moshe. It was Moshe Rabbeinu's throat. Moshe Rabbeinu had a sense of self. He stood up. He was a Raya Mehemna. Moshe Rabbeinu is able to know how to be a true anav. That bittul is mitam hefker. The chametz is here. It's mine. I am consciously choosing to give it over into the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Nachman says also in the Kutumrat Yana, Torah ayin beis, oisir beis, aval. He says, ein ani yadam klal ma'u shiflus amiti. Most people don't really know what shiflus is. Ki bevada ein zatachas sheyesh shuffle v'nivza v'atzel chas v'shalom. It doesn't mean a person should be lazy, and a person should be just shuffle, walking around, shekarim roya mazel. They call it in Yiddish, shlemazlinik. A person should be shlemazel, and just let themselves slide because, I'm not worth anything anyway. Chas v'shalom. This is not anivos. Shiflus is life, and it brings life to every aspect of the person's existence. And it's delightful, and it's joyous, and it's an experience of self-manifestation, but the higher self, not the lower self. And it's an experience of fulfillment. You think that's what Olam Haba is going to be, where everybody walks around saying, I'm a garnished, I'm a good for nothing. Chas v'shalom. A person needs to beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help me that I should be a true shuffle, that I should be a person who recognizes my strengths, and I recognize there is chametz, but I'm giving it to you, Ribbana Da'amakoila. I'm going to use this chametz for you. And maybe we take a year where we don't have any chametz, but the rest of the year we engage with the chametz. And the rest of the year we say, I'm a Moshe Rabbeinu person. I have a sense of self. And I have my talents and my abilities. I have a role to play in the world. But I'm going to channel that to reflect only the Shechina Medaberes Mesach Groinai. So we have to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ikra HaChaim Ve'ikra Tainik Shel Elam Haba, a final source, L'Kut Maran Tanyana, V'zeh Yeduatz Known She'anava B'li Chachma Ina Klum, another source, Anava without wisdom is nothing. Certainly that's not what anivus is, to walk around with a low bent overhead. Oh, I'm nothing. It's a joke. That's not what anivus is. Not even if it was authentic, and most of the time it's not authentic, but that's not even if it was authentic, that's not what anivus means. Kiza anava psula. This is a terribly and especially emotionally detrimental form of anivas. That's not what the Torah means. Ve'ikra anava kishiba chachma. No, anava means you have chachma, you have gifts, you have abilities. Use them, but channel them for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we end source number 13 with the Torah Tamima. And the Heilige Torah Tamima leaves this comment on Bamidbar, Perek Chav Aleph Pasuk Yud Ches. And the Pasuk says, Umi Midbar Matana. Umi Midbar. A gift came from the Midbar. What's this? Amar Rava, says the Gemara, Ma'id Chsiv Umi Midbar Matana Mimotana Nachliel Bamais. What does this mean? Kivin Sha'oisa Adam Atzme Midbar. When a person makes himself like a Midbar, Show hefker lakol. Bittul mitam hefker. Then Torah nasna loy b'matana. Then you get the Torah. Who did the Torah come through? Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is mi midbar matana. Moshe Rabbeinu is a midbar person. The Torah Tamima adds another source, different lashon and erevin and daladam and aleph in mesim adam atzmi midbar zesh are called dashin by midbar that everybody steps on, that everybody uses, that everybody has benefit from. Talmudim Miskayim b'yadav imlav Miskayim b'yadav. He says the same exact thing because this was Moshe Rabbeinu. Why was he the one to bring down the Torah for Klal Yisrael? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the inyan of the midbar. And what's a midbar? Say Chazal, it's hefker lakol. That's bittul mitam hefker. That means that I have the chametz and I'm choosing consciously to give it over. Moshe becomes not Avinu and not Malkeinu. He becomes Rabbeinu. He is a teacher. Moshe Rabbeinu utilizes that capacity to channel the Shekhinah through him, that it should be Shekhinah medaberes b'seich groinai. And in so doing, Moshe Rabbeinu models for us how we can overcome our chametz, how we can overcome our ego. Is not the approach of the Avraham Avinu, which has its place. There's an aspect of it, not only, let's say, the approach, or primarily the approach of David HaMelech, which has its place, but ultimately, Anav Ma'id Mikol Adam, Avram David, that it should be Moshe Rabbeinu. It should be the recognition of our capacities. It should be the awareness of our talents. I mean, Midbar Matana. It should be Hefker Lakol, where I recognize it's mine and I relinquish ownership of it. It still exists in the world, but it's not me. It's for a higher purpose. Baruch Hashem la'olam, amen va'amen. See how deep HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah is. See how vast it is. See how every single aspect of learning Nigla, which is Hein Gufei Halachas, which is the body of Torah, isn't just reflective of panemius concepts in its generality, but even if you get down into the sugyas and three shitas and Bittul and a Ran and a Meiri and a Ritva and so on and so forth, if you believe that that's all body oriented, there must be neshama there. And you squeeze out the neshama there means I'm able to take a practical message for myself. So when I close the Gemara, and I close the Kavitz Mefarshim, and I close the Shulchan Aruch, and I walk out, it didn't just remain an intellectual pursuit, but I brought it down into my from my heart, down and I channeled it down into my heart, and in so doing, it's able to give us a experience of being able to connect not just to the concepts and the halachas, to be able to practically do them, which is very important ultimately, but primarily, Rachmana Liba Boy, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the heart. And if we're able to find the heart and soul of Torah, then we're able to really bring out relevant messages that apply far beyond this particular mitzvah, this particular halacha as it relates to Pesach. It's something relevant for us the whole year. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us. First of all, with a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, it should be like Chazal say, B'nisan Nigalu, B'nisan Asidin Ligail. We should get redeemed this month. Be'ezras Hashem, it should be a month of redemption and a month of truly breaking out of our inner mitzarim, our inner constraints. But ultimately, our Kodesh Baruch Hu, and this is maybe part and parcel of the Geula, should help us to be humble like Moshe Rabbeinu, to recognize our strength, to have a strong sense of self in a holy way, for the purpose of being Marbek Kvod Shemayim, for the purpose of revealing our Kodesh Baruch Hu in the world, helping ourselves and as many people as we can reach in quantity and quality, to help other people as well come to this realization of the beauty of the Torah, of the beauty of Klal Yisrael, of the beauty of themselves, of the beauty of nature, of the beauty of history, of the beauty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's story that continues to unfold. And that ultimately, the more that each and every one of us are activated in this way, we bring the process of the Geula closer and closer to its culmination. Bebias Goyal Tzedek, with the final coming of Mashiach b'meher b'yameinu, amen va'amen. Thank you so much for listening. Wishing everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
אני הבן ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני